Welcome to BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. Today we're discussing the issues of intelligence versus privacy in terms of the amount of data that businesses want to collect to provide services for us as consumers and the amount of privacy that we're willing to give away. To discuss those issues we have Toby Stevens, who's a security expert from the Enterprise Privacy Group. Welcome Toby. We have Waleed Hadid, the Head of Analytics at Ogilvy One. Welcome. And we have Lance Fisher, Global CIO of S3. Welcome, Lance.
Thank you. So,
chaps, perhaps you could just ask a sort of generic question to start with. Do people understand what they're giving away when they reveal, for example, their location data on an app or sign up for things on the web? But they really know what they're doing there. Perhaps we can start, Toby. What do you think?
I would say most people are completely unaware of the amount of data they give away. It may be that they consent to the content that they provide, for example, when sending messages on the internet, but they're neither being asked for their consent, nor are they actually able to understand the data being collected in terms of the metadata that comes with it, and the fingerprint that they leave behind for the activities. So I would argue that it is almost possible in the current environment to make people aware of what they're giving away and how it might be used in the future.
Did you say it'd be impossible to do that?
Almost impossible.
Almost impossible. Okay.
Technologies and interfaces.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So we need a simplification of the information that we use. Now, when we were having our setup chat before we started recording live, we were talking about a simplification of consent issues.
Yeah, I think the view I have is actually consent is so wide range of areas, and I think will be quite useful to have a range of, say, 4 or 5 key icon-defined sets of consent areas. So someone will see this icon, recognize exactly what type of consent, makes it easy, digestible for users, very quickly can recognize which of the five areas, for example, 5 areas of consent am I giving my rights to this app. I think it's quite critical to start communicating this more widely. And we feel at Ogilvy actually we need to be more transparent. We are more transparent when we engage with clients. Actually, we are transparent. Take this out. Let's not start it. I think there is a need for us to categorize the consent into a manageable number of areas and use an icon or graphical illustration of the key areas of consent and communicate this as part of the app. Makes it easier for users to look into that, recognize which consent they are accepting and agreeing to, and therefore use the app freely and comfortably. We are at Ogilvy very transparent in the way we work with our clients and with the way we communicate consent to customers, and we have an openness policy with the information we collect.
So who should be driving that push towards standardization, which has been going on for quite a time, really?
I think you've got 2 extremes, haven't you? You've got the government and you've got commissions trying to put privacy laws together, and I think the most forward of that is probably Germany and European legislation, and then you've got commercial organisations who are collecting this data, obviously for some commercial benefit, and I think certainly at S3 we take the view, because one of the things I do as CIO is I chair the data committee as well, because when I joined S3 it was fairly obvious to me that we didn't have a control of the data, and if you don't have control then you might find you've got unintended consequences, or things happen because you were in control of that data. So what we did is said actually we want to control the data and we want to be completely open with what we do with that data. So S3 as a recruitment consultant, people come to us and they give us CV data. We store that on a database, so we have consent to store it. We store it for different time periods because when people are actively looking, some people, like a contractor, may always be looking, so he's always happy for you to have the latest CV and the data. Other people, if they're permanent, they might say, no, I'm only interested while you were looking for the role. No, you're not. I'm not interested. But actually, I might want you to keep in contact with me. So we can do that. And other people say, no, I don't. I was happy when you got me a job. I don't ever see you again because you're recruitment consultants. So different people have different requirements. But I think as a company, you have to be ethical. And I think the big issue we have at the moment is we don't know why people are collecting data. Why are they collecting that data? And the data's moved from your good old credit card your date of birth, it's now about a digital trail. You leave a digital trail whenever you use an app, whenever you use a device, whenever you log onto the internet, whenever there's a cookie looking at there, and any correspondence you have with a commercial organisation. So the big debate is, well, what are the Yahoos doing, what are the Googles doing, what are the Facebooks doing, what are they doing with this data? And it's not about traditional data, it's about a trail that you leave, and based on that trail they can start to predict what type of personality you are, what you do, what your buying trends, and that data is very, marketeers love that data, so it has commercial benefit, and if you can sell that data, or if you think you can collect it today to sell it later in the future, yes. That's the key, I think. And I think as an organisation, certainly as a UK PLC, we take the view you've got to be open and honest about what you do with the data. You need to protect it. You need to make sure it's private. You can do whatever you can to protect that data, but you've got to be open with what you're doing it with your in our case, candidates and clients.
Yeah, absolutely.
That sounds like you're the exception,
yeah.
Because all too many organisations treat consent as a constant, and a binary constant at that, tick or not ticked.
Yes.
And they don't take into account the contextual nature of consent, that it changes. Whilst I am looking for a job, you have my consent. Once I found a job, you no longer have my consent. And it could change day by day, depends who's asking, when they're asking, why they're asking. And there simply aren't the intelligent mechanisms that users have within the interface to specify that in almost anything that we use online. And early attempts, particularly back in the 90s, to try to standardise consent online, largely bombed because they couldn't get that to work. The BCS has worked with the likes of the Technology Strategy Board in the UK, trying to research these issues to deal with them, but I still think we're a long way away from the solution. Is
that because we're technically able, or is it more the will?
It's about finding a common interface that everyone can understand. If we had Apple's budget to throw at fixing consent, fixing that interface, I'm sure we could do something about it, but there simply isn't the budget out there to achieve that.
Okay, that's interesting.
And do you think consumer awareness of consent might drive that momentum forward?
I suspect that we're in the early stages of a consumer lashback against collection of data.
Yeah.
But that said, every time this happens, people then move on to the next big thing, be it X Factor or Royal Baby or whatever, and lose interest in their concerns about data. So I think in this stage in the big data life cycle, it's not in the big provider's interest to worry about consent. Why raise an issue and make a problem of it when there are plenty of loopholes that can be used to keep collecting data, and we'll then worry about purposing it and repurposing it later on.
I think you're right, it's risk and reward, isn't it? So the risk is somebody might, the data protection laws are not there yet. They're catching up, but they're not there. And equally, jurisdictions change. So I can go, actually I'm in the US, so you can't apply European data protection to me. So you can work around it. And I'm sure you can find some location on the planet that doesn't have any data protection laws. So you say, well, we're basing our data centre there. And then you've got the backlash of is the consumer. The consumer is the only person I think can change it, because they can start to say, I'm not happy with what you're doing. I don't know what you're doing. Why are you collecting this data and what you're using it for? And if an organisation doesn't answer that, then they have a reputational risk then. And that's the way you can get it, because most companies are ethical or want to be ethical, and they want to play by the rules, but they also know there's a valuable asset in collecting all of this data that we may use later as a marketeer's dream.
And that point, of course, is how do you revoke consent in a meaningful way? Again, in the world of big data, how do you achieve that? It's very easy to tick a box. It's very hard to then find the right person you've got to contact to say, please remove me from this data set. And where companies are sucking in so much data, if I'm removed from a data set and say you can't hold data from me, in some cases within a matter of hours, there's data about me coming in again. So the idea of revoking or deleting data is going away, and we're now thinking far more in terms of suppression. I will hold a record on you sufficient to know that I'm not allowed to hold any more or use any data about you.
Yes.
And that's the consent
that
we have in
revocation no longer exists.
And it's the same consent we have in marketing. So you can hold information on and traditionally companies held information about individuals but suppressed any marketing communication.
Yeah.
And they have to have the name and the customer
Yeah, if you've done a
information.
transaction, you
Yeah.
have to have that.
So to be able to track that, actually I have this customer suppressed, so I'm not going to communicate with them. So it's kind of